Welcome to the History Unplugged podcast, the unscripted show that celebrates unsung heroes, myth-busts historical lies, and rediscovers the forgotten stories that changed our world. I'm your host, Scott Rank. Hi everyone, welcome to an in-between episode where I answer any question that you have about history. Today's question is, what are legendary treasures that have not yet been found, but are commonly thought to exist? There are a lot of things that we could pick and choose from for here. One is the Sword of Mars, which was supposedly buried with Attila the Hun after his death. When he died, as legend goes, followers redirected a river, buried him and the sword in a burial mound, then redirected the river back to its original course over the top. Well, that's what accounts say that are often always full of embellishment, and the course of rivers change over time anyway, so even if this feat were accomplished, the course would have probably moved on beyond his burial site. Now, Attila could have been washed away with the river, or he could have been uncovered, but the great Hun would have had quite a tomb, so if it did exist, there's a good chance that it would have been discovered. Now, let's look at something that we have much more good reason to believe does exist. I would choose the 1715 treasure fleet. What is the 1715 treasure fleet? This is a fleet that has to do with the War of Spanish Succession. This was a war that broke out in 1701 between the French and the Spanish and the English and the Dutch, and the war was caused by a rift between two dynasties, the French and the Habsburgs, where in 1700 the King of Spain, Charles II, dies, and his will states that his successor should be Philip of Anjou, the son of King Louis XIV. And when his son took the throne, Louis XVI announced that even though Philip was king of Spain, he would also become king of France when the time came. And the English and Dutch had a big problem with that. Long story short, this gets into all sorts of dynastic rivalries that could majorly upset the balance of power in Europe, and then also the global trade that's emerging with all these different colonies. Because of this global trade that is happening, there is a lot of naval warfare that happens in the Caribbean. There's a lot of military vessels, there are supplies, and there's wealth moving all throughout the Caribbean. Well, here's a result of what happens with all that wealth and everything moving between the European mainland and the Caribbean. 11 Spanish treasure ships were lost in a hurricane near the coast of Florida on July 31st, 1715. This fleet was called the Plate Fleet because of plata, meaning silver in Spanish. Silver coins still wash up from time to time on what is known as the Florida Treasure Coast. It goes from Mico in the north down through near Jupiter, Florida. In September of 2013, a family found $300,000 worth of gold about 150 yards offshore. Well, here's a little bit more background. In 1712, Spain had just finished the War of Succession, which meant that it was light on funds. Luckily, they had yet to loot all the riches from their colonies in the New World, so in 715, they assembled 11 galleons and galley-class ships containing pearls, emeralds, gold, and silver to transport wealth from Cuba back to Spain, and it was one of the largest treasure fleets ever. Now, of course, what's the problem of sailing from Florida back to the Old World in July? That's because your ship is going right during hurricane season. 7 days and thousands of dead sailors later, the fleet had been sunk. So to this day, golden goblets and silver plates wash up on the Treasure Coast beaches. But what's most intriguing about this, of the 11 treasure-filled ships, 4 haven't been located. One of them, the San Miguel, was lighter than the others, just in case they were hit by a storm. So it's suspected to have survived the initial carnage and ended up further north. And according to today's estimates, if we adjust the value of all the gold and silver and valuables that were sunk for inflation, could be worth as much as $2 billion. So you can imagine there have been a lot of underwater treasure fleets that have been very interested to try to find the location. And we know from Spanish galleons that they can hold up to 2,000 tons of cargo. Rest assured, if you see a lot of retirees in Florida with their metal detector out scanning the beaches, they have a very good reason to be where they are. Well, thank you so much for submitting the question. If any of you would like to submit one to me, you can do so by going to historyunpluggedpodcast.com. And you can submit a question to me in either email form or you can leave a voicemail as well. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Thanks for listening to the History Unplugged podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get your daily dose of all things history related, from ancient Greece to the Cold War. You can do that by going to historyonthenet.com/subscribe. Speaking of history on the net, if you want to dive deeper, go to our site historyonthenet.com, and there you'll find blog posts, book reviews, and all of our other podcast episodes. Plus, don't forget to rate and review this podcast so we can bring you the best daily history content possible. We'll see you next time at the History Unplugged podcast.